Hello and welcome back to Case Continued. This is part 2 of our exploration into the Chris Watts case, a case that has haunted and divided people around the world since 2018. If you haven't seen my first video, you might want to go and watch that first, especially if you're brand new to the case. In this series, we're working to break down the story piece by piece, not just to understand what happened, but to carefully examine the facts, the evidence, and the many theories and narratives that have grown around this case online. Because, let's be honest, there is a lot of misinformation, speculation, and even lies being passed off as truth, and it's time to separate what's real from what isn't. This is not a series about sensationalism or shock value. It's about truth-seeking, however uncomfortable or complicated that may be. I'm going to add an important disclaimer, which I added to my first video, and I'll continue to add throughout this series. I don't tolerate victim blaming, bullying, or personal attacks in this space. Debate is welcome, but debate the facts, not feelings. Ask difficult questions, but don't mistake theories for facts. This video, and the series as a whole, is intended for mature audiences as some of the content may be distressing, especially involving children. So please just take care of yourselves while watching. Today we'll be exploring Chris Watts' second confession from prison, the one he gave after his sentencing, and the controversial letters he wrote to author Sherilyn Cadle. We'll ask, does this new version of events finally match the physical evidence? Why did law enforcement go back to speak with Chris months after he was convicted? And how credible is Cadle herself and the story she helped tell? This case isn't just about what happened, it's about why so many people still question what we've been told and what that means for the victims, their families, and the true crime genre as a whole. So let's begin carefully, respectfully, and as honestly as we can. I'm Fiona, and this is Case Continued. Months after the crimes, Chris Watts sat down with FBI agents and Colorado investigators to finally confess. Again. This time he told them everything, or so he claimed. This is a full breakdown of that second confession, in his own words, and what still doesn't add up. In this prison confession, Chris admits that he and Shanann argued. She confronted him about his infidelity. She asked him if he'd really meant it when he said he didn't love her anymore. And then he says she told him, "You're never going to see the kids again. Don't hurt the baby." Those are the last words Chris Watts claims his wife ever spoke.
So nothing really happened that night. It was in the morning. And it was, me and Shanann, she got home like at 2 o'clock. And, I felt her get into bed. And I just felt like I didn't really but I just made sure I looked at my phone at 2 o'clock and make sure she looked like she's in there. And I could kind of feel her kind of stirring around a little bit. And, I just had a feeling that she knew like what was going on. I mean, obviously I didn't use like an NRO gift card, that I got, and I used my actual credit card. And I kind of just felt like she knew what was going on, and she started rubbing her hand on me, and we ended up having sex. But I guess that was more like a test.
Oh,
I would have thought.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because when we talked, when I woke up for later on in the morning, like I pretty much told her like I didn't think it was gonna work anymore. And she was like, what happened? What was last night? You know?
Mhm.
So I figured that must be called the test after I've gone through everything in my head.
That makes sense.
And she just told me, you know, like, to get off of her. And she was like, I knew there was somebody else, I knew there was somebody else, and there was somebody else. I couldn't just say, yes, there is somebody else, but then she said, never gonna see the kids again, never gonna see them again, get off me, don't hurt them. And then
Is that what she said?
that was good. Like when I climbed in bed, that was pretty much like on top, pretty much like straddling her. Doing.
Okay.
That she thought I was gonna like, you know, hurt her or baby or something. So, because she knew that like, something had happened. She thought I was just trying to, just check out or something. So, and that's when it happened.
I know it's hard, but do you mind if we talk to the tiny bit deeper about that? So she comes home. She touches you. You guys have sex. It seems like she's doing her test, which I understand. Sounds like you do too.
I'm sure, like, Nikki or something, Cole Atkinson or Cassie probably told her,
That's what I was thinking, right? They talked about it during that whole weekend.
more than like that. That's my parents told me there was like going through like text messages. It's like all like pretty much they all kind of just told her he's with somebody else.
Yeah. And she had spent a lot of time with the gals. That's what they did probably all weekend is talk about it, give her advice. I think that's what we found, right? Yeah. Okay. So she comes home. You guys have sex. And then did you fall asleep between then and going to work?
Yes.
Okay. So then at some point, does she wake you up or does you wake up for work?
A lot of more.
Oh, okay. And you're going to work out.
Mhm.
But then that's when she started wanted to talk more. She was pretty mad.
Yeah, it was, I had already kind of knew that, using that credit card was kind of,
Was that intentional?
Yeah.
I had no other way to do it.
Oh,
I used like, cause I got these Anarco gift cards from like, doing good stuff at work and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
so then Shanann, did she actually say you're never going to see the kids again?
She said it to me before.
Yeah. That's kind of hard to hear.
Yeah, because she'd said to me before she went to Arizona. Cause like I wasn't really sleeping in the bedroom. I was sleeping on the couch or in the basement bed or something. And, like she had slammed the door. You're never gonna see the kids again. Somewhere. Yeah.
Did she get fiery like?
Only once in our entire relationship I ever seen her that way.
Yeah. And that was a time before, or was that on the night that it happened?
No, it was back in North Carolina.
Oh,
It was just like one of those. It was just a fiery argument that
yeah.
I never raised my voice to her or anything, and I just got mad and I slammed the door and she's like, "Ow!" I'm like, should have slammed the door.
Was that when you were in North Carolina that last week?
No, it was like
Previous to
this
that?
was like 2010, 2011.
Oh.
It was like early, in her old house.
Before kids.
Yes,
Were you dating or were you married at that point?
dating.
Oh,
Yeah, it was just like I don't remember what it was about. I think some girl maybe texted me like from my past or something, and like it was just like this, and she was like, don't have that happen again. And I'm just like, I have friends,
right,
they're females. Like I
Right.
don't even talk to this woman anymore.
right.
And it was just like, no,
Was she fiery? Did she have that Italian blood that her mom has?
Lord, yes.
Was she always like that, or was she? Did she snap at things?
She would snap at me, but you could tell like something really irked her a little bit.
Yeah.
It would come out.
0 to 100 type thing, or what?
Yeah, 0 to 200.
Oh, interesting.
She gets acclimated about something. She's like, all right, it's gonna happen.
Well, that's why she was probably so successful at Thrive, right?
Why did you get on her like that?
I just when we got on the bed, that's just where I got on.
Is that so she would listen to you?
I felt like she could probably listen to me just laying beside her, but I got on top of her.
Hmm.
And every time I think about it, I'm just like, did I know I was gonna do that before I got on top of her?
Really? That's an interesting thought, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know if you do.
Just like the whole everything that happened that morning, I don't know. Like I try to go back in my head. I'm just like, I didn't want to do this, but I did it. It's everything just kind of like
Felt like you had to.
it just felt like it was. I don't even want to say it felt like it had to. It just felt like there was already something in my mind that was implanted that I was going to do it, and then I woke up that morning, it was going to happen, and I had no control of it.
You never thought about it before?
It was just like I don't want, like when, like just like in the sentencing hearing, that prosecutor said it takes 2 to 4 minutes, something like that to happen. Like why couldn't I just let go? I didn't.
Oh, it's interesting.
I just let
Was
go.
it feeling like it was in motion and you just couldn't stop it?
Yeah, it was just like I don't even want to know what she saw when she looked back at me. Honestly,
Did you look at her? What was she doing?
but fighting.
Why do you think she wasn't fighting?
I don't know. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she was just. Now I read the Bible. It said, where the scripture says, "Don't forgive these people for they do not know what they do."
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she was saying that. I don't know what she was saying in her head, but she, like when you guys told me, like, take off your shirt and check for defensive wounds, and there wasn't going to be any. She didn't fighting. I don't know why.
Like she didn't grab. Could she grab your arms, or were her arms pinned down,
I
or?
don't, I remember. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think like I moved toward my knees or around her arms or anything. It was just kind of like when I got on top of her, we started talking. That was it. It's kind of like in my head, or like in the back of my head, that was going to happen. And just like at the end of the conversation, it was just like, that's what happened. I just wish I could have let go.
Did it seem like it was that long? 2 to 4 minutes? How long did it seem for you?
It almost kind of felt like it was longer almost, because it felt like time was standing still. It's kind of like I just saw my life just disappearing before my eyes, but it just like I couldn't let go. It was like somebody else, like if you picture somebody else around you, holding your hands, holding you, keep you from not letting go.
At some point there was a statement about rage. Do you feel like you were in a rage at that point? How did
That's the only way I can describe it, honestly. Like a snap, something. I mean, I don't.
So, then what?
Just, but just after Shanann was, I guess, once she was gone, it was just like I didn't know what was going on. It's like there was like a traumatic, I don't know what you call it, traumatic event type, and everything, and like I was shaking. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I had done. I still wasn't in that right state of mind. I don't think like I was in control of what I could think or what I could do at that point in time. Like most people say, like, why don't you just call 911? I'm just like, unless you're in that situation,
You don't know.
We don't know what we would have done. It's easy to play Monday morning quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that.
Chris says he straddled Shanann on the bed. He began to strangle her. No weapon, just his bare hands. When it was over, Shanann was dead. Their unborn son, Nico, was dead. And that's when the most horrifying part of this story begins. He then loaded Shanann's body into the backseat of his truck. Then, unbelievably, he put his daughters in the backseat, alongside their mother's corpse. No car seat, no plan, just 45 minutes of silence. 2 girls sitting inches from death. Once they arrived at the oil site owned by Anadarko Petroleum, where Chris worked, he laid Shanann's body on the dirt beside his truck. Celeste was the first victim. He smothered her with a blanket. No struggle, no chance. He carried a small body and shoved it into an 8-inch opening on top of an oil tank. Bella had watched. She knew what was happening. He smothered her too. This time, she fought. Hard. Investigators later found severe injuries in her mouth. Her last words, "Daddy, no."
What happened next?
Bella came in.
Is that what happened? Bella came in. What she said?
Oh, why?
Did she hear something? Is that what she came in?
Obviously, I think.
Okay. What did you tell
Mommy don't feel good.
her? Did that happen with Bella right in that room?
Not proper.
What happened?
She walked in as, when she talking about me. She was sleeping.
Mm-hmm. Did you take her back to her room?
But she had in that sheet that we found on site.
Okay. Then what?
Carried her downstairs, backed my truck up.
At that point, were the girls still there? Okay. So then Shanann's in the truck. Then you went back to the house.
We got everybody out in the truck.
Was Bella first or was Cece first?
And the truck?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So Shanann was first, and then Bella was next. Was Bella alive when you guys got in the truck? Oh, okay. What happened?
I woke back up.
Okay.
It's I don't really want to talk. It's not this part, honestly. Being a dad was the best part of my life. So I took it all away.
I think that's the hardest part for us, Chris, is we see those videos, we see that love that you had for your girls. Like, it's obvious to us, and even to us, it's hard for us to understand how a dad who's given piggyback rides and, making snacks and watching princess movies and those kinds of things, how you get to that point,
Like I said, there was just like something else was controlling me that day. I had no control over what I was like to fight back.
Yeah.
Like when that prosecutor said that Bella bit her tongue, like repeatedly, I just wanted to bang my head up against the wall.
So you put Shanann in the truck, and then you put the two girls in the truck? Were they just sitting in their car seats, or I guess they didn't probably have car seats in your truck, did they?
So sitting in the back with in that bench and
So Shanann was back there too?
she was on the floor.
What did they say about Shanann being on the floor?
Mommy, okay?
What'd you tell them?
She'll be fine.
Did you have their stuff with them? With their toys and their blankets and stuff?
They had something with them that they carried. One of them, I think Cece and Bella had like a blanket or something with them,
Mm-hmm.
like a pink blanket or.
What about the dog? I think one of them had a dog, right? The dog or dog.
Yeah, one of them had like a little barking dog.
Was that with you too? Do you know?
I think it was. Trying to it's hard to remember. Like if
Yeah.
they had like big blanket, small blanket.
So, I think I saw on the video that you put a gas can or something in the back of your truck. Was that right? Did you have different plans?
And
Where did you put that in there?
I don't know what was going through my head. I felt like maybe I could just get rid of myself at the same time if I was doing all this, honestly.
Yeah.
You just think about that?
What'd you think about that?
I felt like I deserved to live after what had happened.
Was there any thought to the whole family going away that day, to include you?
After everything had happened, that's a definite thought.
Yeah. See, it's interesting to me. We had all kind of wondered if there was a point when you were all together, and if you were all going to pass together. That to me makes sense, but that's, even though it sounds crazy, that's what a family man does, right?
Family man doesn't do what he did.
No, I know. I guess what I mean is, it seems like you guys were going to be together forever in that way. Is that maybe what's going through your head?
Honestly, I just felt like I had deserved to live.
Yeah.
I knew it was like whatever judgment I was gonna come upon myself, I just didn't deserve to be on this earth anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Okay.
So what made you not do that? You think?
I don't know if it was just more of like because with the site, maybe it was just more of like I would have hurt more people than just me and everybody else. Like I know there's other people out there, not like at the site, but other people like maybe out in the area. Like I didn't want something like on the site to catch fire and blow up, and then other people around would get hurt. The same.
So you were thinking initially about starting a fire out there or an explosion or something, or?
Just no, not for that. Just like maybe I could just take care of myself. But
Oh,
when you gasoline, that's the only thing you do. I mean, I don't have a gun. I don't have anything like that. It's not like you just commit suicide that way. But it's just,
to blow yourself up.
I mean, it was just. I wasn't thinking.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have weapons. I've never hunted before in my life. I don't know what. I mean, nothing was right that morning.
Yeah. I remember you kept telling me that. You kept saying, I didn't know what I was doing, Tammy. I didn't know. Like,
Yeah, when you asked me
I
about
remember-
the sheet, like, what were you doing? Like, I don't know what I was doing.
Yeah. I think you were just like in automatic mode or. So did you drive straight out there? So what were you thinking on the way out there?
I was kind of like what I'm doing right now. I'm just like, nervous, shaking, not knowing, like, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I know, like, my life is completely changed. I don't know, like, what's happening. Like, honestly, like, I try to picture that whole ride. Like, it's like 45 minutes to an hour ride out there. And it's just like, couldn't I have, like, saved my girl's life? Couldn't I have done something? Why did I do it? I don't know.
All right.
Like, this is my flesh and blood. This is like what I wanted all my life, was to be a dad, just to have, kids, and they love me, all that. And it just nothing made sense.
All right.
Like the oil tank, nothing made sense. I'm just like, what the doing?
Mm-hmm. What happened when you got out there?
I took Shanann out just to a place off to the site.
Mm-hmm.
And then
What were the girls doing when you were doing that?
just sent them back to the truck.
And then what happened after that?
CC was first. She did have a blanket. She had a blue blanket. A Yankee blanket.
So was she alive when she went into the oil tank? No.
I put the blanket over her head.
And that's how she passed. Good brief.
I put the blanket over her head. I didn't want to. No. I strangled her right there in the back seat.
What was Bella doing?
Minutes later,
Did she understand? Did she know what was going on?
didn't say anything.
And then the same for Bella. Just without a blanket.
With the blanket.
Oh, okay.
I didn't look. It's like every time I closed my eyes, I started to hear her say, "Daddy, no," and that was it.
That's what Bella said.
I hear that every day.
You go. Sorry, man.
Sorry doesn't take anything back that I did.
I know. Is it possible that in your mind you didn't want them to suffer throughout their life? Was this like a mercy thing?
I mean, you could say that like after the fact, but it was just like, I don't.
You didn't feel like that during it?
I just didn't. I felt like it was just like an anger with Shanann, with everything, that I was just taking it out on everybody that was in front of me that morning.
Yeah.
I mean, kids growing up without their parents, depending on what grandparents or whoever they grew up with, seemed to be fine. But it was just like, it was an anger thing. It was just like,
And what were you so angry at Shanann about? Like if you could pinpoint it.
nothing that makes anybody to want to do this. You could be angry at your spouse like your whole life, but you should never have done anything like this. You should never let it get to that point. But I let it get to a point where I've never been angry before. Like, and this was like the epitome of being angry.
Yeah.
The epitome of like showing a rage, the epitome of like losing your mind. I mean, even like some people in here said, "Dude, like, the heck happened?" It was freaking snapped. And, like, I just walked away. It was like, I don't see it in my mind how it could have, like, I look outside every day. I'm like, what could we be doing right now? Yeah. But, right now I'd have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and what might be a 1-month-old son. And a beautiful wife. And just like, right now it's just me.
So once the girls were gone, was it also just a minute by minute thing as far as the oil tanks?
yeah, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I just thinking about an oil tank just makes me want to throw up.
Hmm.
And was that just because it was in front of you and there it was and it just presented itself? It wasn't a plan beforehand? Okay. Was there any reason why the separate ones?
No, it's like you said, it was like a going up, just going up the stairs, and it just didn't. No, like what Frank said is like I was trying to separate everybody. That's not.
No.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't want to separate anybody.
What was the reason?
I can't even tell you. It was like I said, like something else was in control of what I was doing, and it was like I was doing something I never thought I would ever do in my life.
Did you think there would be less chance of someone finding them if they were in separate tanks, or
Um, whatever my reasoning was in my head that day, it wasn't sound. It was nothing was right.
And you don't even remember thinking about it.
No, it was just like a reaction of something that I wasn't even thinking about.
You talk about the trash bags. Do you remember that?
Oh,
There were two.
okay. Yeah, I was trying to, because like this she kept. I didn't want to, like when I was putting the one coherent, I guess, thing I had, like I didn't want the girls looking at Shanann while they were in the back seat.
so what'd you do?
Put a trash bag on one end and on her feet and on her head, so they didn't have to see.
And they were just too little to kind of figure out, right?
And they didn't.
Okay.
I just know, like when I was driving up there, I mean, they were just, sitting there, just, kind of asleep or kind of just like, holding on to each other, laying in each other's laps. I didn't.
You remember having any thoughts or thinking about why not just putting them all together with Shanann?
It was just happening so fast. I had no time to really thought that was my own. That wasn't like dutifully trying to separate anybody passing away, trying to keep anybody separate. That's the best.
Shanann had her bra on. Was that normal that she would sleep in her bra?
Every once in a while. I mean, she just got home from the plane, so she didn't even take off her makeup or anything. Maybe she was just that tired. But normally, I don't know.
Did it not come off when you guys had sex?
I don't think so. Sometimes she just, she keeps her shirt on and she doesn't want me to do anything. It's like she wants what she wants. She knew what she wanted. That's what she wanted.
Was it just missionary sex?
Yep.
And her final resting place, was that just naturally what she was wearing? You didn't change her or anything like that? Okay. So then on that night, was it just a new type of fight?
It was,
Never had, or what? What happened?
it was a totally different type of fight. It was, it was just felt like, I don't know, it was more anger than anything else. Like there was emotion to it at first, and then it just felt like it was just anger. It was just like, like there was no love there. It was kind of like what we were saying, what she was saying. It was just like, it's almost like we knew like something was coming at each other. We didn't know, like it wasn't ourselves.
Really?
No.
Anger from you or anger from her?
I think it was more anger from me and more like desperation from her because she wanted it.
Yeah.
She knew something wasn't right. Like, like when that whole thing with my parents happened with my parents called it gate, nut gate.
What's that?
The peanut.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, with her family?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pistachio ice cream or whatever.
Yeah, they people.
Nut gate. I
I haven't heard that.
haven't heard that either.
Yeah, I guess what people were calling it.
Okay.
But that was like another out. Like, maybe I could have just like stopped everything with Nikki and just kind of concentrated on helping like whatever happened there. Because Shanann had a story, my mom had a story. Like, whatever happened, I probably asked my 10-year-old nephew. Probably could tell me what actually happened.
Well, and they both have their feelings for good reasons, and they both didn't see it the other person's way. And
Yeah, and like maybe I didn't talk to my parents from then on until like August 6th, and like my dad took that whole week off.
you didn't talk to your parents from then on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because like Shanann was like, do not talk to them, do not call them, do not do anything.
Is that what she said?
Yeah, and the Cece's birthday was 17th, but I think the actual birthday party was like a couple days after.
In August?
July.
July.
And like my mom or my dad was gonna go, but then there was like a post on Facebook about allergies and stuff like that Shanann had made, and my dad was like, no, I just can't do it anymore. Just like because
He perceived that as her taking a shot type thing?
yeah,
Okay.
like she always says she never put those posts directed at anybody. But she had a
If
method.
you read them, you know who it's talking about.
She had a method to the madness and see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wish I could have just took more time just to fix that.
Yeah.
Because I wanted my parents to be involved. Like since like the whole wedding thing, and then up to that, it was like my mom, my sister were always like combating with Shanann combating with them.
Mhm.
My dad was always cool. Like he's just like me. He's just like go with the flow. Like I just want everybody to get along type deal.
Chicks,
I
man.
loved your dad.
Oh, he's the best.
Isn't he? I loved your dad.
I'm sorry, keep going.
That's I just wish I could have. When we were at the beach in August. Like my dad was supposed to take through the whole week off just so we could see the kids, and see me, like we have a cookout at my sister's house or something. And then, but we just pretty much spent 5 days at the beach. Shanann like booked it, so I don't want to say like punishment for them not to see the kids, but like I wanted them to see it, see them. I wish I could have fixed all that. And I even like when I was at the beach, I told Shanann that it was more like what was going on was more of like I feel like my dad's not here. I feel like I've lost like something in my life. I haven't been talked to him for 3 weeks. I haven't been see the kids for 2 weeks, FaceTime or anything. And I wanted them to be able to have that relationship. She was pretty much gone. Oh, like she tried to kill my daughter by giving her. I was like, I don't think she gave it to him.
And was that her stance? Is that your mom
put something in front of Cece?
Like to kill her or
No, just like
didn't care,
like
didn't pay attention?
she thinks that allergies and like this state of age is like people think
like it's made up
like
kind of
he'll
thing.
be fine. He'll just have a rash. He'll be fine. I've seen CC, like the first time. Well, I've seen a picture when he had a cashew the first time. It wasn't good. And then she had kiwi the second time, and then the same thing happened. And I know it's real.
So you know it's serious, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like it wasn't like her throat like closed up, but she broke out in this full body rash. It looked really crazy looking, and luckily, like nothing with her throat like happened. But
So did that make you angry at your mom for doing that?
yeah, I mean, I was just like, well, you just gotta. I told her you need to think. You need to pay attention. Just because another kid can have something doesn't mean another kid can have something. Because like when we were at that birthday party at Jeremy's that Sunday, they had this cake there. Like Bella wanted it so bad. I'm like, can't give it to her because she can't have it. She was like, okay. And all the other kids were like, they can't have the cake. But like I just kind of took them off and gave them some one of those frozen pops or something. But it's just like she had to learn that just because one kid can have something and there's another kid that can't have it for a legitimate reason, like she couldn't have done it. But that's the kind of talk I had with her. And Shanann called me. I think it was maybe like middle of July or something when she told me all this had happened. That's when I called my mom and talked to them for a while, and then they're just like, they just couldn't deal with her anymore. Shanann just kind of like, they like flipped out. My nephew told Bella to go hide behind the curtain because I don't think your mom was going to let you come over here again or something like that.
Oh.
So it got heated.
Oh, it was bad.
Really?
Yeah, it was like a last straw between them, I think.
Like in the same room or over the phone?
No, they were at
They were
my
really
mother's
heated.
house. Yeah. But Cece and Bella and my niece and nephew were there.
Okay.
How did Shanann find out about the ice cream thing?
Because Shanann was there, and I guess they were all sitting. One was couch, it was kind of like a U, and my niece went into the kitchen, and she knew where the ice cream was.
So it's not like your mom gave it to her? Like she got her own?
Yeah, she went in the freezer, got it, went out, and stopped beside Cece and started eating.
Oh.
But like it's just a matter of like Cece could go like
Right.
like that. Now, I don't know what would happen if she just got it on her hand.
Right.
But like I know on like the prick test, on the back, it's like a well.
So were they staying there at your parents' house during that time?
Yeah, it was. So they would go from from Sandy and Frank's house for like a few days or 5 days, and then go to my mom and dad's house for a couple of days. Back and forth.
So it happened during that time. They were there, yeah. Okay.
So there's a bit to unpack here, and the first thing that we're going to start with is what Chris has just been talking about there. His parents. In this confession, Chris gave investigators a little bit more insight into the way that he viewed his parents and how he believed they viewed Shanann. He described his mother, Cindy, as stubborn and controlling and said she always disapproved of Shanann. He also claimed that his parents thought Shanann was a bit too assertive, too independent, and that they felt pushed aside from the moment that his relationship with Shanann began. I will apologise at this point. I am in my office. However, the next door neighbours are having some work done and I can hear the distant strains of a drill starting to creep into my audio. I do apologise and I hope this will remain bearable. What really stands out is how passive Chris claimed to be in all of this. He told investigators that he didn't defend Shanann during Nutgate, that he avoided conflict, and that he tried to please both sides, but ultimately failed both. He said, "I didn't stand up for her, I just let it happen." It was a telling moment, really, one that seemed to expose his deep fear of confrontation and his habit of emotional detachment. Now let's get to the big question. Was Chris Watts trying to pass blame onto his parents or onto the conflict between Shanann and his family? Not directly. He didn't accuse his parents of causing the murders. But like his references to Nicole Kessinger, which I purposely am not including in this video because they are for our deep dive into Nicole Kessinger, he brought these issues up in a way that suggested context, not responsibility. It's a subtle but critical distinction. He wasn't saying, "My mum made me do it," but he was saying everything was falling apart and I didn't know how to fix it. In that sense, it reads as a form of soft blame, a way to explain his deteriorating mental state without owning the real horror of what he did. Chris portrayed himself as overwhelmed, pulled in multiple directions, and increasingly disconnected from his old life. The feud between Shanann and his mother became symbolic of that pull, two opposing forces that he felt incapable of reconciling. But let's be very, very clear, nothing about family drama justifies murder. Not a feud, not parental disapproval, not a bowl of ice cream. The fact that Chris even brought these things up potentially reveals more about his personality than anything else. Chris Watts was a man who avoided conflict at all costs until that conflict boiled over in the most horrific way possible. By his own admission, he internalised everything. He didn't speak up, he didn't push back, and over time, that emotional shutdown became dangerous. The people around him didn't know how disconnected he'd actually become because he never told them. In the interview, Chris spoke almost as if he were a passenger in his own life. He didn't take charge, he didn't confront problems, he just let things happen. That's not accountability, that's avoidance. And when he described Nutgate and the tension with his family, it became clear that he was still stuck in that mindset, still viewing the world through a lens of passivity and victimhood, even after committing unspeakable crimes. This second confession of Chris Watts, talking about his parents, talking about Nutgate, isn't just chilling because of what he did. It's chilling because of how he talks about it. Calmly, passively, and with a slightly unnerving detachment. Nutgate was never about the ice cream, for either Chris or Shanann. It was about control, resentment, and the breakdown of a man who refused to confront his problems until it was too late. So let's just quickly break down the Nutgate incident. In the weeks leading up to the murders, family tensions were rapidly escalating. Shanann had a significant falling out with Chris's mother, Cindy, over a food allergy incident involving Celeste. Shanann claimed that Cindy deliberately exposed Cece to nuts, which the child was allergic to. This led to a breakdown in communication between Shanann and Chris's family, particularly his parents, who Shanann accused of being manipulative and toxic. This event, known as Nutgate, may seem trivial to some, but it did symbolise deeper issues in the family dynamic and the growing emotional divide between Chris and Shanann. Now, this segment may provoke differing opinions and it could potentially lead to strong reactions. It's important to focus on understanding the individuals involved in this scenario and the motivations behind their actions. We really do have to refrain from projecting our own personal perspectives onto them. The primary concern isn't whether peanuts or tree nuts were the actual issue, nor whether Nutgate was justified or inconsequential. Instead, we should consider what they believed, how they responded, and how these dynamics were influenced by their personalities. So on the 9th of July, Shanann, Bella and Celeste were visiting Cindy and Ronnie Watts' home. They were staying with them for a few days while they were in North Carolina. Shanann and the girls were bouncing between her parents' home and Chris's parents' home. Jamie, Chris's sister, had also visited Cindy so that Cindy could babysit Jamie's children. Bella and Celeste were happily playing with the cousins without issues until one of the cousins, Dylan, took an ice cream cup from the freezer. When Celeste saw the ice cream, she wanted one too. Due to her allergies, Cindy told Celeste she couldn't have the ice cream and offered her an alternative instead. As expected of a 3-year-old, Celeste was upset and began to cry. Cindy tried to comfort Celeste by explaining that her allergies sometimes prevented her from always having what she wanted. Shanann overheard this conversation and, in a highly agitated state, confronted Cindy, accusing her of endangering Celeste's life. Shanann tried to take the girls to bed for an afternoon nap. One of the girls' cousins began following the girls to the bedroom, still wanting to play, and at this point, all hell broke loose. A heated argument broke out between Cindy and Shanann, which upsets all the children present in the process. Concerned about the situation, Shanann contacted her parents to pick her and the girls up, citing safety concerns. To avoid further conflict, Cindy left her own home with Jamie's children while waiting for Shanann to leave. Shanann expressed her frustration on Facebook regarding the incident involving her mother-in-law. She texted Chris that his mother was reckless with Celeste's life and suggested that she intended to cause upset. Shanann decided not to attempt to mend the relationship and stated that Chris's family would no longer see their daughters. She also insisted that Chris distance himself from his family and continued to express her displeasure publicly until August the 12th, 2018. Chris appeared to agree with Shanann, acknowledging that his mother had made a significant mistake. We heard him say in the prison interview that the girls' allergies were real. Celeste, during pinprick tests, had reacted very badly to nuts, and so it wasn't like Shanann was just making this up. Chris's parents, who already had concerns about Shanann, decided not to attend Celeste's birthday party due to rising tensions. They chose to block Shanann on Facebook and sent Celeste's birthday present to 2825 Saratoga Trail. Shanann had Nicole Atkinson return the unopened gift to Cindy and Ronnie. In a Facebook post, Shanann suggests that this wasn't the first occurrence of an incident involving nuts with her in-laws. Whilst we can sympathise with Shanann, who was clearly worried about her daughter's allergy at that point, she doesn't seem to have acted in the most appropriate way. Let's just be honest, she doesn't. Social media isn't the place for personal grievances. Publicly airing dirty laundry often intensifies drama. It deepens resentment and damages any chance of future reconciliation. What could have been resolved privately became a public feud. Even if your post targets your in-laws, your partner may feel personally attacked. It puts them in the middle and constrain or even break down relationships. If children are involved, they might later see these posts on social media and be hurt by the way that the family was spoken about. In high conflict situations, like divorce, custody battles, or family disputes, your social media posts can and will be used against you in court. Judges may view angry or aggressive posts as a sign of poor judgment or instability. Even outside the courtroom, these kind of posts damage your credibility and reputation within your family and the community. People often say more about themselves than their target when they post online rants. Friends and family might view you as immature, mean-spirited, or unable to handle conflict maturely, even if your complaints are totally valid. Emotions fade, but screenshots don't. A moment of anger can leave a permanent digital footprint. Months or years later, you might regret what you wrote, but it could still be floating around, damaging relationships and your personal image. If Nutgate proved anything, and this is going to be difficult for some people, but it is a very truthful statement to make. If Nutgate proved anything, it was that once Shanann felt scorned, she would turn to social media to weaponise her anger, and she didn't care how many lives she burned in the process. That's not to say that Shanann was a bad person for doing this. She was, after all, dealing with a husband who had gone cold on her, a pregnancy and financial worries. On the 9th of July, this particular incident could have felt like the straw that broke the camel's back to her, and with Chris being fairly distant, she potentially felt that turning to a Facebook audience would be the best way to get everything off her chest. Many people in the world have behaved in this way. Shanann wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. But at a time when her relationship was not going well, and her husband was slipping away from her, it didn't seem like the correct way of handling things. I'm just saying, this isn't a personal attack. It's an observation, and we can observe Shanann's character. We are allowed to do that, so long as we're doing it constructively. Chris has said from the beginning of their relationship that Shanann drove a wedge between himself and his family, and Nutgate fractured an already fragile relationship with his parents. We shouldn't forget that Chris's parents and his sister didn't attend Chris and Shanann's wedding. Only his grandmother went along. There'd been tensions in the run-up to the wedding, with Shanann accusing Cindy and Jamie Watts of not sending out all of the invitations that they'd been asked to. When Jamie Watts was unable to attend a nail salon appointment before the wedding due to work, Shanann removed her and her child from the wedding party. As Jamie had already paid for outfits, and due to the conflict, the Watts family chose not to attend at all. Cindy has since stated that she always regrets that they weren't there for Chris on his wedding day. I can only imagine how he must have felt, how hurtful it must be to be told by his own family that they wouldn't be celebrating with their only son on one of the most important days of his life. How embarrassed he must have felt, and how awkward it must have been to explain away his missing family to other guests. Shanann had told Chris that she was upset with his family and felt that they'd tried to ruin things on purpose. Chris took Shanann's side, and a familial rift occurred, creating a distance between them all. At some point after this wedding incident, things had obviously taken a turn for the better. Shanann even wrote a lovely post on her Facebook page in which she mentioned her in-laws. Cindy herself, in interviews, has said that they had a number of good years where there was peace. Everybody was getting on okay. Things were fine. And then we come to Nutgate. Shanann expressed significant dissatisfaction regarding the Nut incident, and she was unwavering in her insistence that Chris distance himself again from his family. Chris complied with her request, though he felt resentment towards Shanann for restricting his and their daughter's interactions with his family. And he also experienced frustration as Shanann continued to express her grievances on Facebook rather than allowing the situation to de-escalate. There are many people who still ask, why didn't he just get a divorce? This particular scenario involved a disagreement over the presence of nuts in ice cream. Consider the potential reaction to a much more serious situation, such as an affair with a co-worker during pregnancy, in the middle of financial difficulties, which could potentially result in divorce, the loss of a home, the loss of employment. Why didn't he just get a divorce? Imagine how Chris would have felt seeing her friends and relatives agreeing with her angry Facebook posts about him. Imagine the hate that would have been directed at him. He was so concerned about how he looked to others, so concerned about not wanting people to think that he was a bad guy, he would never have been able to take that kind of punishment for his actions. Maybe we ought to ask, did Shanann handle the Nutgate situation badly by turning it into a public spectacle? And if, in her upset, she did, in Chris's mind, did that seal her fate? The answer to that question isn't what you or I think, it's what her husband thought. Of course, we're going to be sitting here stating that nobody deserves to be murdered over a family falling out, especially two innocent children that didn't understand the complexities of their parents' failing marriage. But did Chris think that? Well, we now know what he thought. when investigators inquired whether the nut incident had influenced Chris's thoughts, feelings and emotions in a manner that contributed to the tragic outcome involving his family, he acknowledged that the incident was among the factors, if not the principal trigger, that led to his actions. So while we don't blame the victim, Chris clearly did. Now, Chris, of course, is 100% entitled to have his opinion and his own thoughts and feelings on the Nutgate incident and how he felt about being told that he couldn't see his family. Obviously, this is something that would be hurtful for anybody, especially those who don't like high conflict or drama type situations. You know, Chris was close to his dad. Being told that he couldn't see him was something that probably hurt unbelievable amounts. But the fact does remain that while Chris is entitled to feel the way that he feels, if he is indeed telling the truth, we just come back to his weak personality being the cause of this tragedy. He couldn't just get a divorce because he couldn't take the scrutiny, the hate, the vitriol that would come from Shanann's family and friends in a public space, such as Facebook. While Shanann potentially reacted in a manner that wasn't helpful for their relationship at that point in time. And we can say that, honestly, what she did was probably the wrong thing to do. She wasn't perfect in the relationship. We do still ultimately come back to Chris and his personality. We just can't escape it. Nutgate is something that will be covered in a little bit more detail potentially as we go forward because it does relate to other things in the story. So it's not all going to be unpacked here. There are a couple of other interesting things that came about from the interview and some that have led to more questions being asked about the case and more theories being thrown out there. So during this second confession, to quote Chris, he said at one point, "It was just like I knew she was going to be gone. It was like everything that we were saying, what she was saying, I just wished I could take all of it back." That moment, everything that we were saying, what she was saying, is what some interpret as a possible slip-up. Why say we if it was just him and Shanann? Well, you do have to give it to people. The use of we can definitely imply a third party. Chris was known for being very careful and guarded in interviews, so when he used we followed by what she was saying, it could be seen as accidentally revealing that he and someone else, potentially Nicole Kessinger, were both present and talking to Shanann. The statement doesn't logically match a two-person argument. If it were just Chris and Shanann arguing, what we were saying would usually cover both parties. So why separate what she was saying? It sounds like he's isolating Shanann's words from a group effort. Chris also has this history of minimising the truth. He repeatedly lied in early statements, and people naturally question whether he was still holding things back, even during his so-called full confession. That suspicion leaves room for deeper interpretations of any odd wording. And on top of that, Chris often used quite distinctive language, like referring to his daughters impersonally or avoiding active voice. The switch from we to she might not be accidental, but rather a subconscious reveal. So while I can sit here and agree that that was definitely a very strange thing for him to come out with and is pause for thought, it is actually a common speech pattern. In stressful, emotional recounting, especially when trying to recall arguments, people often mix up tenses and pronouns. Saying what we were saying, what she was saying, could simply reflect trying to separate mutual conversation from what stood out most, which, to him, was her words. There's never been any forensic, digital or testimonial evidence placing a third party at the Watts home that morning. Phone records, text messages, neighbour surveillance. It all points to Chris acting alone. The actual context of this segment suggests that he actually just meant Shanann and himself. Earlier in the confession, Chris frequently switched between talking about we, as in him and Shanann as a couple, and she, when referring to her specific statements or reactions. And it could simply be another example of that pattern. The most important thing, I think, is that law enforcement didn't flag the statement. The FBI and CBI interviewers didn't pause or question the statement at the time, suggesting that they didn't seem to find it out the ordinary, or that within the flow of the conversation, it didn't seem like a slip. So, does his confession really sound like there was someone else there? Not conclusively. That particular line that people harp on about is ambiguous at best. And while it could be interpreted as a slip, it lacks the kind of concrete corroboration that would elevate it beyond speculation. Chris frequently used vague language, especially when recounting emotionally charged moments. He was also clearly overwhelmed and under pressure during that interview because he wasn't expecting them, he potentially didn't have his story fully straight, and that adds to the likelihood that it was simply clumsy phrasing. However, given Chris Watts' history of deceit and the unbelievable nature of the crime, people are right to question everything. That skepticism is valid, but skepticism needs support. And in this case, there's no evidence that anybody else was present or involved that morning. Something else that really sticks out to me in this interview is Chris Watts has already been sentenced, he's already in prison, and he seems to know quite a lot about the case from the things that he said in interview. There are sections where he's discussing what his defence team had been saying to him about things Nicole Kessinger had said after the fact. So he was privy to a lot of information, obviously. But when he's talking to law enforcement about taking the lives of his girls, he still gets it wrong. It's a sharp observation for anyone to make, and it's actually a chillingly important one, because Chris continues, even in this interview, to state that he strangled the girls. So we need to take a look at a few possible interpretations of why Chris continues to say strangle when it doesn't match how the girls actually died. I suppose it could be cognitive distancing or euphemism, if you will. Chris might be using the word strangle because it's somehow easier for him to say, less emotionally direct than smother, although it's still a very direct, very in-your-face, personal method. Smothering a child means physically covering the face, watching them struggle. It's deeply intimate and gruesome. And he does say that he covered the girls' faces with a blanket, but then says he strangled them. Strangle as a word, by contrast to smother, is a lot vaguer. So we might be trying to soften the memory or make it more tolerable to say out loud. He could actually be trying to control a narrative. You know, he has a long history of manipulating stories to maintain a certain image. Saying strangled might sound more clinical or quick than smothering, and he could be using that phrasing to minimise the horror for himself or for others. Even in his so-called full confession, he could still be curating what he reveals. It's possible that Chris had a total lack of technical understanding. Did he truly understand the difference between strangling and smothering? He's not a forensic expert, and in his mind, both might fall under the umbrella of asphyxiation. If he covered the faces or held them down, he might have described that as strangling without grasping how specific the terminology really is. Was this residual deception? As we know, and we've talked about, he lies repeatedly, from blaming Shanann to hiding the bodies. He's shown a strong instinct to cover up and control. So it is reasonable to question whether his use of strangle is just another half-truth, a way to appear like he's telling the full story while still holding something back. And then there's something even more chilling. It's possible that even at the time of his second confession, Chris didn't fully remember or never consciously processed how he killed his daughters. He admitted to being in a state of emotional and mental dissociation. That morning, he described feeling out of his body, almost robotic. So if he smothered the girls quickly, especially if it was in darkness or in the backseat of the truck, as many suspect, he may not have had a full visual or tactile memory of what he did. In his mind, he might have defaulted to saying strangle because it was easier to frame or because he genuinely didn't allow himself to relive it clearly. That's not to excuse it at all, but it does raise the disturbing possibility that the most horrifying acts of that day are still fragmented or blurred in his own mind. Chris's repeated use of the word strangled might not just be a linguistic quirk. It might reflect detachment deception, ignorance, or a deeper psychological refusal to actually face the full truth. And then here's where things take a darker and more controversial turn. Some people believe Chris continues to use the word strangle because that was the original plan, but not necessarily his plan. According to this theory that emerged, Chris might be hinting that he wasn't the one who actually killed the girls, that someone else carried it out, and that strangling was part of a coordinated decision. So that theory goes something like this. Chris and an unnamed person, often speculated of course to be Nicole Kessinger, may have planned to kill Shanann and the children. The plan involved strangling the girls, possibly because it would leave minimal evidence or be easier to control. But when the actual act happened, someone else carried it out, perhaps by smothering and not by strangling. So Chris continues to say strangled because that's the version of the plan he knew. He never saw what happened or doesn't want to say what really did happen. According to this line of thinking, when Chris says strangle, he's not describing what happened, he's describing what was supposed to happen. A lot of people like this theory, and we've got to kind of ask why. Why is this theory so compelling to some? Probably because of Chris's vague and inconsistent language. His failure to accurately describe the method of murder for the girls leads some to believe that he didn't do it at all and that he's either guessing or sticking to the script. There are minutes and even hours in the timeline between when Shanann arrived home and when Chris left the house with the bodies that some believe don't fully add up. In his initial confession, Chris claimed Shanann killed the girls. Later, he admitted that was a lie, but showed a willingness to shift blame and possibly protect someone else. And with Chris often referring to the deaths in a strangely detached way, people have come to the conclusion that he's simply talking about something that he didn't directly see. But here's a reality check. While this theory is intriguing, it faces major problems when held up to the evidence. Investigators combed through phone records, text messages, home surveillance and GPS data. There was no sign that anyone else entered the Watts home during the critical hours or that anyone else was in the truck with Chris when he transported the bodies. There is no evidence. Plenty speculation, no proof. Chris has never even hinted at another killer. He took full responsibility. If he was protecting someone, he didn't leave breadcrumbs that would logically point to another killer. He just didn't. The girls' autopsies showed smothering as a cause of death, not manual strangulation. That detail undermines the idea of a specific plan to strangle them, because if Chris was sticking to the story of a plan, wouldn't he correct himself once the actual cause of death was known? Then, of course, there's the psychological aspect of the confession. Chris's repeated use of strangle could just simply reflect a combination of detachment, confusion, and emotional shutdown, not a conspiracy. It's more consistent with a disintegrated mental state than with someone sticking to a covert story about a third party. It's really not unreasonable to question Chris Watts' words. He's a proven liar, a manipulator, and a man who destroyed his own family. But the idea that he's still using the word strangle because someone else killed the girls and he's still hiding that remains utterly speculative and is unsupported by hard evidence. Still, it's these inconsistencies, his vague language, his disturbing calm, his emotional detachment that just keep people asking, is there more to this story than he's ever admitted? One of the most chilling, disturbing and quietly heartbreaking moments in this confession comes when Chris describes the murder of Shanann. During that section, he says something that stuck with a lot of people, that she may have been praying while he was killing her. What did he even mean by that? Chris doesn't actually elaborate. He throws it in almost as an afterthought. But the weight of it is enormous. There are a few possible interpretations of why he said this, I think, but none of them are comforting. Chris could have been attempting to further distance himself emotionally by saying maybe she was praying. He could have been trying to soften the act, both for himself and for the listener. The image of someone praying in their final moments is peaceful, spiritual. It carries a kind of grace. But the reality of what was happening in that moment is anything but. That line can be read as Chris trying to rewrite the final seconds of Shanann's life, removing the terror, the confusion, and the physical violence from the picture. There is a chance he doesn't really know what happened. So this moment could actually reveal a disturbing truth, that he wasn't fully present even as he was taking his wife's life. His confession is full of vague, detached language, and when he says she didn't fight back, and maybe she was praying, it could suggest that he wasn't even fully aware of her responses because he'd shut himself off emotionally and mentally. So this statement might not be about what she was doing, but about what he failed to witness. It could be a way to humanise himself through Shanann. It could just be the most manipulative possibility. He could be invoking the idea of Shanann praying to evoke sympathy, not just for her, but for himself. By painting the moment as spiritual or tragic, he's controlling how it sounds. He's framing it as something inevitable or fated, rather than what it really was, a brutal, conscious murder. So in this version, he becomes the passive observer, even as he's the one committing the act. Of course, him making this statement could also be a tiny glimpse of guilt or shame. He might have realised in the months following the murder just how horrifying that moment was. Saying that she was praying could be his way of acknowledging that he stole something sacred, her last chance to speak, to plead, to live. If that's the case, the line isn't manipulative, it's haunting. And then there's another interesting comment that's made by Chris. He tells investigators that Shanann got home around 2 a.m, she got into bed, and then he says, "We had sex. I felt like it was kind of a test in a way. She just wanted to see how I felt. That's the only way I could put it. It felt like a test." A few hours later, he says he woke her up and told her that the marriage was over. He didn't love her. He didn't want the baby. And then he strangled her. How likely is this claim? Here's the honest truth. This detail is deeply questionable, and there's several reasons to be sceptical. There's no confirmed forensic evidence, such as semen, biological material, or physical signs showing that sex occurred that night. And since the investigators knew he made this claim, it's likely they looked for it during the evidence collection. The autopsy is potentially a slightly different entity all on its own because the bodies were found after a couple of days. Shanann's especially had been buried in a very shallow grave, which had exposed her to heat and other elements. But the fact that no such evidence was publicly confirmed makes the claim less credible. The emotional context also makes it highly unbelievable. I mean, let's just look at what we know about that night. Shanann had just returned from a work trip. She was likely exhausted and emotionally drained. The marriage was on the rocks. Chris had just spent time with his girlfriend, Nicole, and had been emotionally cold to Shanann in the weeks leading up to her death. And she'd even confided to friends that he was shutting down and avoiding intimacy. So would Shanann really initiate sex that night, when her husband had been so distant and just hours before he murdered her? It's possible, but emotionally inconsistent with the reality that we know from her messages, her behaviour and her mental state at the time. But if it's a lie, why lie about it? If Chris made this up, and many believe that he did, what would be the point? Why include such a specific, disturbing detail? Could have been to humiliate Shanann in death. As harsh as it sounds, some people do genuinely believe that Chris included this detail to strip Shanann of dignity. He'd already murdered her. Now, in telling her story, he subtly casts her as emotionally manipulative, testing him, using sex as a tactic. It's a dark way of retaining power in the narrative. By saying that they had sex right before the murder, Chris muddies the waters emotionally. He makes it sound like things were still normal, that there was some kind of connection and even intimacy just before things went wrong. It adds ambiguity which benefits him If the audience sees them as affectionate that night, it creates psychological dissonance. It softens the brutality. Chris had been having an affair for weeks. He might have wanted to portray himself as somebody still desired by both women, as if Shanann still wanted him even after everything. Now that would be a narcissistic move, but one that does align with someone who doesn't want to see himself as a villain. This particular line is incredibly revealing, I think, when Chris says, "It felt like a test, like she just wanted to see how I felt." This tells us that he interpreted her alleged advance not as affection, but as a threat or manipulation. In his mind, Shanann wasn't reaching out. She was challenging him. Even in a moment that should be vulnerable or emotional, he sees her as the aggressor. That's a huge insight into how he viewed her. And again, something that we will be covering in later videos is that relationship between Chris and Shanann. We're going to break that down. But this suggests that Chris, at least in his own retelling, was casting himself as the victim in every single dynamic. Even in his final hours with Shanann, he paints himself as the one being tested, not the one doing the damage. His claim that he had sex with Shanann before murdering her is more than a timeline detail. It's a statement that's loaded with manipulation, distortion, and possibly projection. There's no solid evidence to back it up, and the way he frames it as a test shows how warped his view of Shanann had become. Whether it's true or not, the fact that he chose to include it in his prison confession says a lot more about him than it does about her. Chris was no longer trying to avoid arrest. He was already serving multiple life sentences, so you might expect him to be completely honest in his prison interview. But that's not exactly what happened, and we know that. In that almost 5-hour conversation, he confessed to killing Shanann and his 2 daughters. But when you listen carefully, it's clear that even his truth was filtered, softened, and sanitised. And that's before we move on to his in-depth confessions to Sherilyn Cadle. So the question is, why lie when you've already lost everything? To maintain control over the narrative. Even behind bars, Chris shows a need to control how the story is told. He shares just enough detail to sound truthful, but leaves out emotional context, blurs timelines, and uses that awful vague language. He doesn't describe the girls' deaths in full. He glosses over the moments leading up to the murders, and he downplays how he moved the bodies. This suggests that he's not fully confessing, he's managing the damage. The thing that everybody says Nicole Kessinger was doing, Chris is doing too. Holding back the ugliest truths, possibly because saying them out loud would mean truly having to face them. Who knows? Chris admitted in the interview that he didn't feel like himself that morning. He described it as being in a trance, going through the motions. His lies might be his way of avoiding the unbearable guilt. By not fully verbalising what happened, he doesn't have to sit with it. He doesn't have to feel the shame. There is the fact, of course, that he might not actually remember everything clearly. In the interview, he often struggles to recall exact details, especially around the timeline, and at times he contradicts himself. He even says, "I honestly don't know why. I feel like something just came over me." This might not just be a convenient excuse. It might reflect a psychological disconnection, a kind of mental dissociation during and after the murders. And he might not be lying in the traditional sense, but instead recalling through a bit of a fog of shock or suppression. And that could explain also his mechanical delivery. He talks about strangling his daughters like he's narrating someone else's story, not his own. Chris gave very specific details in that prison interview about how each murder occurred. So let's look at what he said and how it stacks up to the facts. He claimed that he strangled Shanann in bed after an argument. He then put a body in the truck and the girls were still alive. At the oil site, he strangled Cece first with a blanket over her head. Then he did the same to Bella. So what matches up here? The Shanann's autopsy. That supports his claim because the cause of death was manual strangulation, with injuries consistent with pressure to the neck. So that was the bruising that was found on her neck during the autopsy. We're going to go into the autopsies at a later date because there's quite a lot to unpack with them as well. The girls' bodies were found exactly where Chris said they would be found, in 2 separate oil tanks. And GPS data, which we've seen, confirms his location at the oil site, and the timing of his movements aligns with his account. So in terms of logistics, Chris told the truth in the prison interview. But when it comes to method and emotional content, things get murkier. What doesn't add up is the cause of death for the girls. The girls were smothered, but Chris often, as we've discussed, uses the word strangle, which doesn't match the autopsy reports. That detail matters because it does raise those questions. Is he still confused, or is he deliberately using a less specific, emotionally removed word for some reason? In the interview, Chris couldn't explain why he didn't stop. He jumps from one action to the next without much reflection. He says things like, "I just went with it. I didn't feel like I was in control." And this might be truthful in a psychological sense, but it also leaves key moments open-ended, as if there's more that he's just not saying. In reality, it looks like Chris Watts' second confession wasn't about justice. It was about relieving pressure, protecting his self-image, and keeping some pieces of the truth hidden. Even when he had nothing left to lose, he still used that ridiculous, vague language to mask the brutality of the murders. He downplayed the struggle of Bella. He avoided taking full emotional responsibility. His words align with some forensic evidence, but not the parts that matter the most. The pain, the fear, the human cost. And that is where the truth still feels incomplete. So why did the detectives even go back to speak to Chris, a man already serving his sentence? So we know from his interview that they went back because they were confused. Their investigation had ended very abruptly when Chris had decided to plead guilty. There were questions that they hadn't got round to asking him. There were things that didn't make sense to them, things that didn't add up. They wanted from Chris not only the truth, but they wanted to know what they could have done differently. And this isn't unusual. Investigators ask these questions all the time. This is how they learn and grow. But they did spend quite a bit of time discussing Nicole Kessinger. As said, that isn't for this particular video. It will be covered when we get round to actually discussing Nicole in depth. The FBI, the CBI, they also needed to shut down the case. And they can't do that without full evidence. If something remains open, a case can't be closed. They needed to ask those final questions of Chris to be able to file his case away forever. Chris Watts may have finally admitted to what he did, but in the way he told it, from the flat tone to the careful wording, to the parts he couldn't bring himself to say, he gave us something else, a glimpse into a mind still trying to hide behind its own lies. Before we wrap up this video, I just want to take a moment to say a genuine thank you for watching. I know time is valuable, and I really appreciate you choosing to spend some of it diving into this case with me. If you found this breakdown helpful, interesting, or thought-provoking in any way, please consider giving the video a like, sharing it with others, and subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot more than you'd think, and it lets me know that you'd like to see more content like this. This is only the beginning. We're going to be exploring more true crime cases on this channel, not just Chris Watts. I need to make that clear. I am not going to be a Chris Watts channel. This is simply the first case that I've chosen to cover because of all of the theories and speculation surrounding it versus fact and evidence. There's so many other cases out there that also deserve careful, honest analysis. And if you're interested in that kind of deep dive, stick around because there's a lot more coming. Originally, I planned to cover the letters that Chris wrote to Sherilyn Cadle in this episode as well, but honestly, there's just too much to unpack in one sitting. The letters are disturbing, revealing, and in some places completely contradictory to what he said in his confession. So rather than rush through them, I'll be covering all of that in the next episode, where we'll break those letters down, line by line, and look at what they really say about who he is. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and take care of yourselves. I've been Fiona, and this has been Case Continued.